you just need to remember that maybe we know from the stats that probably a third of the people aren't drinking.
Welcome to the Be Well podcast, wellness backed by science, bringing you inspiring conversations to help you on your wellness journey to a healthier, happier you. Brought to you by Breast Cancer UK. You can start your personal prevention journey right now by taking our prevention quiz. Just click on the link in the show notes. Hello and welcome to the Be Well podcast. I'm Thalie Martini, CEO of Breast Cancer UK, and my guest today is an accomplished journalist, author, and founder of the charitable campaign Sober Spring. In her 2017 book, The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober, which she wrote following her personal struggle with alcohol, was an incredible success for its sharp wit and its devastating insights. It led her to publish several more books, two of which explore other unexpected joys of life and the ongoing joys of being alcohol-free in the long term. So I'm really hoping to be able to discuss this with her today. And what is really compelling about my guest is that she brings to the surface those sharp insights into the role that drinking plays in our lives and why not drinking is more complex than we think. Now, we know that alcohol is a key player in breast cancer risk. Unfortunately, it actually accounts for about 8% of all cases of breast cancer that are diagnosed. So raising awareness about the risk is one thing, and that's something at Breast Cancer UK we're very keen to do. But what makes me so excited about this guest is her unique gift for exposing the blocks that we can encounter when with drinking compared to other lifestyle changes that we want to make. So her fascinating take and her inspiring approach to sobriety has seen her appear on numerous podcasts, including, and it's something I've just listened to, being interviewed by the national treasure Dame Jenny Murray on Women's Hour in 2020. Now, that will be a hard act to follow, but I'm no less enthusiastic, and I can't wait to get into this conversation with Catherine Gray. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today, Catherine.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Well, let's get straight into it. You've now been sober, I've been told, for about 12 years, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
That is
so
an
I was...
amazing achievement, yeah.
Oh, thank you. I was 33 when I quit, and now I'm 45. So it'll be 13 years this September.
Fantastic. And so what was it that made you decide to go sober?
Well, it was a no-brainer for me because I was addicted to it. You know, that was absolutely irrefutable. And I'd worked my way up to drinking 7 or 8 bottles of wine a week. But what was so interesting is that when I quit, even though for me it was 100% certain that that was the best course of action for me, it was only really my mum, dad, another family member, and my best friend that supported that decision. Everyone else said, why don't you just take some time off to reset? You're not that bad, you know. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You've poured me into taxis so many times. I forget whole bars on nights out. So it was really interesting that one of the hardest things about quitting alcohol was other people and their reaction to it. And once I found out how much happier I was on the other side of it, that's what inspired me to write the book, because I wanted to let other people know this is not this terrible, sad, boring life choice that people thought it was back then. I mean, things have shifted dramatically now, thankfully. But yeah, I just wanted to tell everyone, so I did.
Yeah, so the societal kind of blocks, I suppose, to stopping drinking is something we'll really delve into, because it is really quite fascinating. And I suppose I've got a couple of things I'm interested in. When you first decided you want to stop drinking and people, you know, gave you this kind of soft blocking, how did you initially respond? Were you surprised, or were you kind of ready for it? Were you thinking, oh, yes, I expected that?
I feel like I was ready for it, because I would have been one of those people that what I call sober shamed other people. So I remember many times when people came to the pub and said, I'm not drinking. And I said, well, what's the point in you being here? I was unpleasant to people that weren't drinking.
Right. Okay, so you were one of them, one of the antagonists.
I was a sober shamer, and I fully front up to that now. And the reason I was doing it was because they're not drinking made me feel deeply uncomfortable about my drinking. I needed them to be doing the same thing as me in order to feel okay with it. And so that was why whenever, I remember one time I was at an awards ceremony and one of my colleagues wasn't drinking, and I just chipped away at her until finally she relented.
Wow.
And so I was one of those people. So I have empathy for people who sober shame and go on then, don't be boring. It's my birthday, engagement party, Christmas, whatever, have a drink. Because I know the reason they're doing it is because often they're too attached to alcohol themselves, and therefore they want everyone to be doing it so that they feel better. So now that I know that, I react in a different way to it. But because of that, I did expect what I got. And whenever people pressured me, I apologized a lot. I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm not drinking. I'm sorry I'm a drag. Until I really got bored of doing that and just was like, this is very odd. The way that, if I want to have a decaf coffee, nobody says, go on, have some caffeine. Don't ruin the coffee shop by not having caffeine. If you don't eat cheese, nobody really pressures you to eat it. We have a really strange societal blind spot when it comes to alcohol, whereby we think it's not your body, your choice, where we think that if you want to come to a party, you need to drink, and that's just nonsense.
And you're, I think what's fascinating about your book is that it exposes the fact that that's not part of the conversation at all, or it hasn't been, and maybe it is emerging as that. But the thing is, we've also got more and more stats about alcohol, more understanding about alcohol. So we know, for example, that there's an estimated 8% of, as I mentioned before, of breast cancer cases that can be attributed to alcohol. So breast cancer, we advise people to cut down or to rule out alcohol altogether, because actually there isn't a safe level of alcohol when it comes to breast cancer. And we also know that there are loads of other risk factors that we've got evidence for. But reducing your risk is by no means the only advantage. And so what I'd be interested in hearing from you is the things that you address in your book, this whole idea of finding joy, and that the positives far outweigh the negatives. Can you tell us about this so-called this joy that you found, both the physical and psychological, in going sober?
Yeah, absolutely. So even when my drinking through other people's eyes would have been described as fairly moderate, I still found that I paid a cost. There's always a price tag when you drink alcohol, whether it's 1 glass or 2 glasses of wine, that just make you feel a bit smudged and tired the next day. And I saw this quote. I don't know who said it, so I can't attribute it, but it said, drinking steals happiness from tomorrow. And that really landed with me, because I did constantly feel like I was becoming overdrawn and then paying the cost the next day. And now that we know that alcohol is a disinhibitor. That's why we find it pleasurable. But it does carry an expense. And that expense was just becoming a toll on my mental health. I was really depressed. I was researching painless ways to commit suicide when I was at my absolute worst. And I thought that maybe that was part of my default mental health. But in the 12 years that I haven't drunk, I have never once contemplated that. So for me, that link is direct. That was an offshoot of my alcohol use. And it just... I couldn't believe how much it improved my life overall, improved my relationships, even though it was a bit bumpy at the beginning, where people had to sort of accept that I wasn't drinking anymore, that our relationship was going to look very different to last orders at the pub. It was going to be more like spinning and brunch. I can still go to pubs, obviously, and I do, but, I genuinely don't want to stay till 11 p.m. anymore. And financially, I saved so much money. I couldn't believe it, because it's not just the alcohol. It's the taxis, it's the nightclub entry if you're in your 20s or 30s. It's the class that you don't go to and you pay a fine. It's the takeaway the next day. It's the things that you buy the next day to make yourself feel better. When you actually add up everything that is an offshoot cost of having a big night out, it's quite extraordinary how much we spend. So I was able to buy a flat eventually, and I don't think I would have done that if I was still drinking. Just everything in my life improved after I'd got over the bumpy bit, like the first 6 months or so, where I was sort of batting back that social pressure and all of that. So I think it is important that people know that it comes to an end. You know, the anxiety, you do get a spike if you quit. Of course you do. You know, you've been using this as a social crutch for a long time. The social pressure, it all dies down, and then you get to feel what it's like to live life without reliance on what is a drug. So
yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned, you know, dealing with that social pressure, getting past that point, and that's something that you address in your book, because I think without addressing that, it's hard to get to the next part. You know, it sounds like there's, you know, it's a phased approach, but the first one is kind of overcoming that one barrier that doesn't seem to apply to other lifestyle issues. And you talk about society as a drink pusher, which is an interesting term. And in fact, your book is full of amazing quotes, by the way. And I'm going to be quoting some of them today. And you've called the UK's approach to drinking as wonky. And actually, we tend to really agree with that at Breast Cancer UK. So we've done some polling, and we did some last year to understand, you know, why people drink and get into the drinking kind of patterns of the Brits. And we actually found some really stark results that align with a lot of what you say. So, for example, the Brits feel pressured to drink at least once a week. So that's pressure that they feel to drink once a week. 1 in 11 Brits feel rude saying no to drinking when they don't even want to drink. So that's a problem. And then 28% of Brits believe people will find them boring if they don't drink. So this suggests that pleasing other people actually is a big motivator. So, you know, once you start to construct it that way and see how much it's embedded in the way we behave socially, you can see why it's a problem. So why do you think we're so desperate to seek approval? And why do you think we're boring without alcohol?
Well, I think the first part is we are hardwired to people please. You know, for my most recent book, I interviewed an evolutionary psychologist who said that it's such a basic psychological urge to seek approval of our tribe or community. You know, it's next door to seeking shelter, food, a mate to procreate with, if that's what you want. And the reason is, it would have meant even 100 years ago, if we were like cast out, we wouldn't have had great chances of survival. So that's why we feel the urge to please the people at the party and have a drink when they're pressuring us to. So knowing why that's uncomfortable, because it is deeply uncomfortable when people are saying, oh, don't be boring, don't be a buzzkill, have a drink. And you're saying, no, I really don't want to. And that's why so often people fall back on excuses. And I was talking to somebody the other night she very rarely drinks. She doesn't really like it. And she often pretends to drink in order to get people off her back. And I relate to that. I did that for a long time as well. And I often think it's almost easier if you have a line in the sand. So with me, I'm a non-drinker. You know, everyone knows that now in my life. And whenever I encounter it with strangers, I am so... it's almost farcical to me when somebody pressures me to drink now. So, but I am 12 years in, whereas because for her the line isn't defined, it's blurry, people still feel like they can pressure her. So I often think that if you have, say, I don't drink during the week, you know, that's my rule, or I only have one drink, that's my rule, that helps people back off.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's interesting that you say, well, you're 12 years in, and therefore that kind of, it's almost like you've strengthened your resistance to those pressures. But is it also, would you say, part of your identity now with how you interact with those people who might drink or not drink? Is it something that's present I suppose, in terms of how people interact with you. Oh, well, we know Catherine doesn't drink, so she's a non-drinker.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was almost like the centerpiece of my identity for a good year or two, because it needed to be in order to redirect my life that way into the non-drinking, right? Whereas I was such an enthusiastic drinker before. Now, I don't know whether I would describe it as core to my identity. It's more just, it's a fact about me, like the fact that I have brown hair or blue eyes. It's just something about me. And I don't think now it influences how people interact with me. I still get invited to the parties. People just know that I might not stay till 1 a.m. now. I'll leave at 10:30. And coming back to actually something that you said, which I didn't really tackle, the boring thing.
Yeah.
I really think boring is the worst thing you can be called at a party. It literally, that strikes such fear into us. It almost takes us back to school where we're like, oh no, I'm not popular. It really isn't something that we want to be called. And so when people say that, it is a lever to get us to do something. And what I've found so interesting, it's happened to me twice where I've been sat at a networking dinner party and also a wedding where the person next to me did not know that I wasn't drinking. And for an hour and a half, we had a really engaging, fun, chatty, bantery conversation, and there was no problem. An hour and a half later, they found out I'm not drinking. You're boring. And they turned away from me. And that is not me. That's not about me. I'm not boring because I don't drink. Their perception of me is that I'm boring because I don't drink, because they want to get drunk that night and therefore they don't want to be around me because they'll feel self-conscious. So just knowing that it's not about you, it's that person feels boring when they don't drink, that you're talking to, and that they feel self-conscious around you because you're sober. It's nothing to do with you and how you present. Some of the most fun people I know don't drink. So, just not taking that to heart. But I know it's difficult. It is difficult.
And it's an interesting reaction because it's almost, as you say, like they might be feeling judged or very uncomfortable about the fact that they're on a different level, I suppose. I'm here, you're there, you've deceived me, I thought you were with me. And it's really interesting what you said about how people come up with excuses because they don't have that confidence, and that scenario is just not one that they want to be in. And it's much better to kind of, continue with the flow of the conversation than stunt it with, well, actually, I'm not a drinker. You talk about how people who want to stop drinking would rather actually be dishonest, and they've got their excuses around antibiotics or wanting to be fit, diet missions, driving, all of these things which we can pull out of a hat and seem to be fairly routine that kind of shut people down. And actually, we also looked at this in our survey, and we found that 1 in 10 Brits would rather lie, actually. So that is a clear kind of tactic. They'd rather lie about being on medication, for example, than admit that they actually don't want to drink. And 9% have, and this is the big one, they have pretended to be drinking something alcoholic to avoid questions. And you, in your book, you talk about this self-consciousness and about not drinking. That's really quite ironic because you say there shouldn't be any cringe around choosing to do something positive for your body and well-being. So it is really counterintuitive, this stigma, because this essentially is what it is, isn't it? It's a bit of a stigma. And why is non-drinking so often seen as a mark of shame rather than a badge of pride?
I mean, I will say, so I wrote that 10 years ago now, the mark of shame rather than a badge of pride. And I do think things are really changing around that. But I do still think something that hasn't shifted is the boring or smug or, health bore stigma that is attached to non-drinking. And another thing I'll say is that if it makes it easier for you to pretend that your tonic is a gin and tonic, or that you do have an early meeting the next day, or whatever it is, then make it as easy for yourself as possible. There's nothing wrong with, and sometimes this can just be by omission. Somebody says, do you want a drink? I've got one. And it happens to look like something that could be alcoholic, because it's rare that somebody will say, what are you drinking? So it does help to have something that looks like it potentially could be.
Yeah.
And that's why zero beer and, zero Guinness and all of that, it really helps people in social settings, because it means that they don't have to have that awkward conversation. And if you don't feel like having it, don't have it. You don't have to. You don't have to explain to people at the party what's in your glass and why it doesn't contain alcohol. So I will say that. But it's something that has shifted, but it has some way to shift still. And I think something that we should remember as well is that a lot of it is marketing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It really is. Every alcohol advert that I can think of shows alcohol being a conduit to fun and, romance and
sophistication.
The sophistication, especially with women. And so we have been marketed this our entire lives, and that messaging really sticks. And it's so ironic, because in other cultures they have wild, amazing celebrations, without alcohol. They don't drink at all. I was just in Morocco for the end of Ramadan, and you would not know that they weren't drinking, because it was so fun. So we don't need alcohol to have a good time. We just tell ourselves we do. And then that is consolidated by the marketing and then echoed back at us by societal pressure. But the way that things are going, I really wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years' time it's 50-50 drinkers and non-drinkers.
Yeah.
Because we know that Gen Z are, 4 in 10 of them don't drink at all. And millennials, even a third of them don't drink. So the way that we're going, it will be 50-50 within a short period, especially when labeling and all that comes into effect, because that will spread awareness. So that will recede the social pressure. But in the meantime, people just need to do what's as easy as possible. And if that's meeting people in a setting where alcohol isn't served, going for a beach sauna instead, and for dinner where, it's not so much about the alcohol, it's more about the food. Just do what feels easy. And
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking of that, we had some supper clubs for Breast Cancer UK last year. And obviously, our advice is around good nutrition and how that can help reduce risk, but also going alcohol free. So we had all of these lovely supper clubs. All of them were alcohol free, and we had a range of guests. Lots of people came who would otherwise not be thinking about an evening alcohol free. And for some, it was a very novel idea to go and have something which was, surrounded by very good food, a classic kind of evening, social evening, meeting and greeting different people. You would expect there to be alcohol, but instead we had lovely non-alcoholic drinks. And I remember towards the end of the evening, one of the guests said to me, I can't believe none of us have drunk tonight, and I've had such a great time, and I've had really great conversations, and I've got to know people on a level that I'm not used to in these settings. And I thought, what fantastic feedback that was. And I hope those people kind of went on thinking, that's really kind of changing the whole concept around what fun should look like in a social setting, and how do you let down your kind of your guard without alcohol,
Yeah.
So it was fascinating. Yeah.
It's so true. I mean, I went to a dinner like that recently to celebrate alcohol change and dry January, and not everyone that went were non-drinkers. It's probably, I would say, a third of the people normally drink. And that party got borderline raucous. It really got, quite crazy. And a lot of people were saying at the end the same thing, because you don't allow yourself the possibility, because we're just so used to going to the party and having the drink and, leaving our car at home and getting a taxi to the party so that we can have the drink. So we don't find that once we get past that. So I would say I would peg it at like 20 minutes. Now for me, it's like 5 minutes, but there is like 20 minutes where you need to settle into the party, where normally you would throw a drink down your throat or pre-game by having a drink while you're getting ready. where you do need to like settle into it and calm down. And because it is a bit overwhelming walking into a party and it's noise and people and questions and strangers, you know. So, but once you get past that, what you find is really genuine connection. You don't say anything you regret generally, because you haven't lost your inhibitions. Inhibitions are there for a reason.
Yeah.
They stop you from saying things you regret and opening up too much and telling secrets or making a joke that is a bit mean, you know, all the things that I used to do, although I took it to a whole different level. But, you know, it's you can get there, and the only way that you can find that out is by trying it. And I do think it helps when the settings are alcohol free. So there's loads of alcohol-free bars, and, you know, as you say,
it's glamorous and sophisticated, which is how we associate it as well. And I think people feel comfortable in those settings because they look right, but they're without alcohol. Yeah.
And I think if you attended as well any dry wedding, you know,
Never heard of that.
Yeah, you would find that everyone's dancing at the end, you know. You do get there. It just takes that a little bit longer.
And so, but, you know, so we're agreed that there's so much happening. And I suppose since you published your book, which is quite a while ago, 2017, there has been an awful lot of change socially, a younger generation coming through as well. Millennials kind of started the trend, but the younger generation, the Zers, are really on track with that. However, you know, as I said, we've done loads of polling, and one of the quotes in your book about drinking being deeply stitched into our socializing culture, I think does still apply based on what our poll's saying, because what it found was that a staggering 29% of the British public believe they need alcohol to get on the dance floor. And on top of that, 1 in 4 agree that drinking gives them the confidence to meet new people. And 16% admit that having used it they've used it as a form of icebreaker to help navigate those awkward meetings. So that social anxiety seems to still be a driver for drinking, and a way of coping with those situations, when we've just described the exact opposite, as you say. But the dance floor thing I find really interesting. So can you give us some tips and some insights into how we can get into what's known as dry dancing?
Yeah, so it was one of the biggest blocks for me. I genuinely thought that I was never going to date or dance again, you know, when I quit drinking, because I couldn't imagine going on a first date, meeting new people, as your poll says, or getting onto a dance floor without having had a drink. And one of the reasons for this, if you think about it, we frequently start drinking when our social life really takes off. You know, in our teens, when we start going to parties and we start, you know, hopefully legally going to nightclubs, you know, that's when we drink. So we have learned that is the cheat code to get onto the dance floor or meet, you know, people you fancy and talk to them and, you know, get involved. And it is uncomfortable when you stop. So some of the things that I found really helped me with the dry dancing is weirdly seeing dancing as almost like exercise. Because I don't feel self-conscious when I exercise. So it might help if people go to Zumba or Latin group, you know, whatever, you know, dance class their gym has, because they will see that they can like move around and get the rhythm and have a really good time without, obviously nobody has drunk in that class, hopefully. And that sort of shifts it in your mind away from sort of like this sort of bird of paradise dance where you're trying to impress people into just something that's moving your body and having a good time. Because that's ultimately what dancing is. And when I'm dancing, I am not looking at anyone else's dancing and assessing it.
That's the golden rule, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's such a weird thing that we think that alcohol is required to make us dance better, when actually it probably has the opposite effect. So another thing that really helped me was, this sounds really strange, but if you're at a wedding and you've got a hotel room, put on something that always makes you dance, like your dance floor starter, and dance around before you go back down and dance, because it's almost like pushing through that.
So get into the mood before you get down there.
Yeah, because it's the beginning bit that's awkward, much like the party without alcohol. It's just the beginning bit that you need to push through. Another thing, I mean, I've even danced in toilet cubicles before going back out and then running onto the dance floor, because that just moves me through it and just gets me there. Just really observing what other people are doing, you know, that they are not looking at you. No. They don't care what you are doing. They don't even notice if you feel a little bit awkward at the beginning. And weddings are a really good place to start dry dancing, because there's always a conga, there's always a toddler to dance with. You know, There's lots of people there who aren't drinking for whatever reason, pregnant women, you know, whatever. And so I often think that that's the best place to try it out.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned weddings, because our poll showed that Christmas, New Year and weddings are the main offenders when it comes to peer pressure. So it's no wonder really that not drinking is seen as choosing to leave the party. That's another one of your quotes. But you've just described that it is possible to have fun without alcohol. But why is it that, you know, celebrations are synonymous with alcohol, and how do we break that association? I mean, you mentioned that at every wedding there's always going to be someone not drinking, but equally there is that pressure to drink. And so how do we break that association?
Well, I think again it comes down to marketing. You know, it has been the most amazing marketing campaign ever, that we think in order to toast a couple, we have to lift a glass of champagne. In order to wet a baby's head. I had one person ask me, if you have a baby, surely you will have some champagne to wet the baby's head. And I thought, this is the strangest thing I've ever been asked.
Yeah.
But people really just think that those social markers are impossible without alcohol. I've even had people give me a glass of champagne to lift for the toast. And I'm like, that can just be a different liquid. It doesn't have to be champagne in the glass. But really, truly and honestly, I think it is changing. And if you look around any party, you just need to remember that maybe we know from the stats that probably a third of the people aren't drinking. And you just haven't found each other yet. So that's why it really helps as well if you find other people who are on the same page, whether you want to drink a lot less or just like practice sober socializing, finding that community, like even somebody who you can take as a +1, that really, really helps, because they are out there. It's just you don't know about each other. You know, it's very rare you will go to a wedding and there's only 1 or 2 people not drinking. You'll probably find there's 20.
Yeah, so you're all quietly kind of being discreet when actually there's many more around you that you can't tell are there.
Yeah, because you can't tell they're there, because it makes no difference to how they are. They're just as sociable and lively. So that dispels the myth of sober people being boring. You can't spot them. I don't walk around with like non-drinker hovering above my head, and people don't know I'm not drinking. It's a surprise to them when they find out. So there you go. We've just shattered that myth.
Yeah. And you know, it is so positive to see those changes. And, you know, on our podcast, we've actually spoken to more and more people who are either sober curious or have kind of moved towards being sober, and not necessarily because they've had, you know, terrible alcohol problems. Well, by societal standards, not necessarily, but alcohol has presented enough problem in their lives for them to see that it detracts rather than brings value. But there is also something else that's interesting, and that's that, you know, the world's moved on in terms of evidence as well. So the World Health Organization in 2016 categorized alcohol as a group 1 carcinogen. So that's, you know, something that was very new. And myself, many years ago, I worked in alcohol policy and prevention, and we didn't have that data available at the time. So, you know, we've got a lot more understanding about the risks of alcohol. And then about 10 years later, the World Cancer Research Fund did a poll, and what they found was that 1 in 14 Brits actually are completely unaware that there is a link between alcohol and cancer. So, you know, we've moved on from a scientific understanding, but society hasn't quite caught up in terms of understanding what the real risks are. We play a part in trying to raise awareness. But why do you think that people see alcohol so differently to other health risks? What's the block? And do you think that there's a role for us for, say, bottle labelling to play in raising awareness?
Well, I think the reason people are confused is because we've been fed very confusing messages when it comes to alcohol. And one of the reasons for that is the University of York did a big study in 2020 and found that over the past century, 82% of clinical studies, this is like medical studies, were funded or authored, co-funded or co-authored by the alcohol industry. And I truly don't think people know that. They just pick up the paper and see this study about, red wine being good for your heart, and they don't know that it has actually been funded by a federation of wine producers. It actually blows my mind that is allowed to happen. And Big Tobacco did the same thing, but about, I would say 20 years ago now, all medical journals that were sort of good and respectable stopped publishing studies that had been co-funded by Big Tobacco. And we really need to get to a point where it's the same with alcohol, or where journalists follow the money upriver and look at who has funded the study and see that, oh, actually it's an industry player. It's somebody who has profit at the heart of their interests in funding this study. And what we're finding now is that some of the academics that I spoke to recently for Little Addictions, they were talking about how the academics, the doctors, are pushing back and saying, I don't want to be involved in that study because it's funded by industry. And so that's obviously at the expense of their, pockets and expertise and advancement. We need to find a way for the government to take the money from the industries, whether it's gambling, alcohol, whatever, nicotine products are a big one, and fund the studies without them being able to influence the output of what the studies say. So I think people often think when you pick up a paper and you read about this study, that is gospel, that's doctors, but they don't know who's paid for it. And they don't know how that's influenced the output. So that's the one thing I would want people to be aware of. Listen to the World Health Organization. Listen to the NHS. Listen to Alcohol Change. Many people are not also aware that DrinkAware is funded largely by alcohol producers and also restaurants.
I only found that out fairly recently myself, and I thought, whoa, that's very interesting, because it really doesn't come across. It looks like it's completely independent advice, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does, and they claim to be independent as well. But I don't see how they can be when most of their money comes from the alcohol industry. So that's often what happens. And you see that worldwide, where the alcohol industry will set up a separate organization, call it independent, and then have that as the sort of shell. And isn't it quite disturbing when you think about how on alcohol labels now we have go to drinkaware.co.uk for the facts?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, that doesn't mean that they aren't facts, but it does mean that it's not objective. They should be going somewhere where alcohol industry profits, what actors have nothing to do with it. But
and the public, how's the public going to be able to tell what's behind that? It's the public are going to see they're going to see it on the label, and they're going to trust it because they're used to seeing government advice on labels for various things. So how would this be any different?
Yeah, I mean, and I truly had no idea. The only reason I found out, I'd read every book I could find about alcohol, addiction, recovery, policy, what have you. And the only reason I found out about DrinkAware is I emailed them when I was researching The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober and said, I'm writing this book about sobriety, how much happier I am sober. And I got a really strange reply saying, yes, we completely support your message of moderation. And I was like, that's not at all. I looked back at my email and I was like, that's not at all what I just said. And then I started really going deep on the Googling and finding out, who funds and runs Drinkaware, and I found out the truth. So it's no wonder people don't know, but that's why we need to have these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, younger generations, they're getting a little bit, although they're bombarded with information, they are also a little bit more, shrewd at getting informed about these things. And our survey reflects that really, but we found that the younger generation are still vulnerable to peer pressure. So even though there's a tendency to move, or a stronger desire to move towards sobriety or sober curiosity. But a quarter of 25 to 34-year-olds have also admitted that they're embarrassed to say no. But what we know, since you wrote your book in 2017, is that the millennials were forming the sober movement, but the trend now is really, really booming in the Gen Z. So, this embarrassment is still there, but the desire to not drink is getting stronger and stronger. And so what is it? What is it about this Gen Z? Is it just a natural progression from what the millennials started to do? But what is it about them that makes them increasingly drawn to sobriety?
I think they're really, really health aware. They're very interested in treating their bodies and minds well, mental health. They're all going to the gym. They're all looking after themselves. I'm not a millennial. I'm X. Is that right? Yeah.
Gen X.
Yeah. So 1980, I was born. But I mean, we weren't doing that at university. One person of my social circle was going to the gym and she was seen as a bit of an outlier. The rest of us were all going to the 99p club nights and then going to McDonald's the next day. Yeah. We were not looking after ourselves the way that Gen Z are. Yeah. And it's just so heartening to see that they are actually prioritizing how they feel and listening to what their body's telling them and what their mind is telling them. I think really it's been overstated. A lot of, if you read about it in the newspapers, a lot of them will make a lot about they don't want to be filmed when they're drunk. It's about embarrassment. They can't let go. They call them Generation Zero. They're quite withering, make up they're really uptight and self-conscious and, scared of having a good time in case they're filmed. And I just don't think it's that at all. I think they've grown up seeing elder generations.
And Gen X is not a great role model, yeah.
Exactly. I think I've done quite a lot for the Gen Zs in my family, putting them off alcohol because they're like, I don't want to be like her. She's a nightmare. So I do think that they've grown up witnessing people get very drunk and be very hungover, and they thought that's not for me. And they're much more canny about cutting through this health messaging. As you say, your polling shows that they're much more aware of the cancer link and, the health disadvantages. So, and it will just continue to grow and grow. I wonder what
How can we keep it going? Because, I mean, we're seeing this lovely progression. There's still those social blockers and there's the kind of sway that the industry has. So what's the future? How do we keep this movement going so that it becomes kind of embedded really in our societal kind of norms?
Well, I think if you ever come across any sort of survey or have a way to pressure the government to actually inform people about the health risks. I mean, I'm sure you're aware that in Ireland, the labelling finally got through in terms of warning people about the health risk and cancer links. And it's now been pushed back to 2028, where it's legally enforced because alcohol lobbyists have applied immense pressure and come up with some quite nonsensical arguments for why they can't do it. And the government have buckled to this pressure. So wherever we can, there's hundreds of alcohol industry lobbyists in government, right? So wherever the social sort of grassroots uprising can start to outweigh that, and, write to your MP. So why have we not got this? Why are people not being warned? Why is the awareness so low? People should know what they're putting into their bodies.
And we've got a new cancer plan now that's for the next 10 years. And this is the golden opportunity to get this, to really think about how what government. I mean, it's a fairly simple thing, isn't it, to put accurate scientific information on a label to inform the public about their risk. And if you're thinking about a 10-year cancer plan and how you're going to reduce cancers, you'd think that would be one of the first steps, And now we've got that template with Ireland, but as you say, it's how do we cut across all of those other kind of pressures from industry that influence government,
Yeah, all we can do is keep having these conversations, use whatever influence you have, whether it is just signing a petition. Another thing that we can do socially is agreeing not to push alcohol on anyone else ever. Even if you are an enthusiastic drinker and you want to continue to drink at every party that you go to, don't push other people to drink. You don't know what their reasons are. It could be more complex than you understand. They might be having a mental health crisis. They might be pregnant and not be able to tell people yet for whatever reason. It's really uncool to push drinks on people. And we would never do that with meat. We would never push a vegetarian to have a burger. Don't be boring, have a burger. Yeah. We would never do that. Yeah, with covered caffeine. The same with cake. We would never push somebody to eat cake if they're like, no, thanks.
Yeah, so it's incredible.
It's really weird.
Tell us a bit about your Sober Spring campaign, which you do in partnership with Alcohol Change UK. What's that all about? And it's very successful. What makes it so successful? Is it because you offer those kinds of tips?
I think the reason it has really taken hold is because, so just to explain what it is, Sober Spring, it runs from March 20th to June 20th, and so it's 3 months off alcohol. It happens at a time of year where we're naturally feeling a bit more optimistic. The weather's starting to warm up. January can be a gloomy month anyway. And we know from studies that it takes either 21 days or 66 days to form a new habit. So dry January is amazing. That's why millions of people do it. But for other people, it might take 66 days to sort of shake that new habit loose. And we did some polling around the people who took part in Sober Spring, and over half of them decided not to go back at the end. So I think that 3 months just gives you a chance to find your sober legs. And the fact that over half of the people decide not to go back because they prefer it, I mean, what does that say? So
That's
I think
a staggering success rate, isn't it, really?
Yeah, we couldn't believe it. We were like, is that right? Let's crunch the data again. And it really was, because I think it takes generally longer than a month to really feel the benefits and really feel like your sleep deepen and, skin clears up and all sorts of things happen that you don't expect because you don't know that they're linked to alcohol. And it's also a really good thing to get people off your back. I'm doing Sober Spring. Dry January now is just such a part of the social consciousness. Nobody questions it. I'm doing Dry January. That gets people off your back. Sober Spring is a similar one, but it's longer. So it really helps. So I would encourage anyone that's sober curious to give it a go.
Sounds fabulous. Where can they find out about Sober Spring?
Alcohol Change UK.
Okay. And and you have to do it at that time of year, or you can do it. Can you do a Sober Spring in October, for example?
Well, I think they're introducing a new function to their app, which is called Try Dry, whereby you can do a 90-day stint or a 100-day stint at any time. So again, you could say to people, I'm doing a 90-day challenge or a 100-day challenge, and that tends to stop people, although not everyone.
But
That's
brilliant.
It can really help.
Yeah, and having that, I suppose, goal, 3 months, I would imagine, for someone who's keen to stop but hasn't been very successful, it must feel a little bit daunting. So what an achievement when you get to the end of it. And I can appreciate people will be going, well, why would I undo all that hard work? Why would I go back to it? Let's have a look as well at some of the other books that you've published. So, these wonderful titles. So you've got other books that explore unexpected joys, and in particular, The Unexpected Joy of the Ordinary, which is sounds fascinating. And it's about finding contentment in everyday life. And so at Breast Cancer UK, we do recognise the importance of happiness in forging a healthy lifestyle, because there's so much benefit you get from that. And you coin lots of very thought-provoking terms, which I love. And here's a few. One of them is comparison is the thief of joy. And I looked at that and I thought, well, that sounds brilliant. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I didn't coin that. That was, I think, Teddy Roosevelt. But I think that's one of the reasons.
You quoted somebody else, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons why we find that our mental health dips after we spend a lot of time on social media. And obviously, there's a youth mental health crisis when it comes to them being on social media, because it does encourage that comparison with other people's lifestyles and clothes and houses and cars and whatever, that we wouldn't have otherwise seen. And so we start questioning ourselves and thinking, why haven't I got a whatever second home? I'm lucky to have one home. And, it really does encourage that social comparison that we really could live without. But the real thing that drove the unexpected joy of the ordinary was whenever I quit drinking, I joined something called a gratitude group based on the premise that a grateful heart never drinks. And I started writing gratitudes every day, and I still do it now. I can't go to sleep without it. It's just such a part of my routine. And I found that it completely transformed the way that I see the world, because instead of looking for, everyone generally has a negative seeking brain. And that was very useful back in the day, to look for threat, look for potential peril, and be alert to it. But that really doesn't help us now, because there's very little, threat or peril in our immediate landscape. And so what it does is retrains your brain to look for all those joyful glimmers in every day and sort of record them. And
what kind of things do you record in your, because you say you do it every day. So what are the kinds of things that you put in there?
It can be something as simple as, and I found it difficult to begin with. I found it difficult to even find 5 gratitudes a day. But now I could write 25, even in a bad day, because it can be something like, I went for a run with my dog alongside the river and it was really fun. Or, I had a great chat with Thalie. That was really fun. It's just things in your day that gave you a little burst of feel-good chemicals. And even when you have a terrible day, there's always something to grab onto, and holding on to that really helps me get before I go to sleep as well. I used to be a very troubled sleeper, and something about writing it all out and saying, actually, I felt like today went badly, but actually it went pretty well. All of these things went well, that I sort of slid away. There's a great quote that's like, I think it was Rick Hansen, that says, the brain is Velcro for negative and Teflon for positive, where the positives just slide away. And all of us can relate to that, I'm sure. Say, for instance, if you put something up on a post up on social media and you get 25 positive comments, and then you get one nasty comment from a troll, and it's that comment that we hold on to that takes center stage in our brains, because we do have negative seeking brains. So that's what the book is ultimately about. It's sort of how to coach our brains to look at the positives and record.
Oh, that sounds really brilliant. It reminds me of a quote I heard on a podcast recently from someone who said that he spoke to somebody who we would expect to think of himself as lucky because he won the lottery. And so when he asked him, how did you feel when you won the lottery? He says, I felt a bit unlucky. And he said, what? You won the lottery? He said, yeah, well, on the day that my numbers came up, somebody else had exactly the same numbers. So I had to share the winnings. And so that, what you talk about, that kind of negative predisposition, rather than thinking, how amazing that I won, he's going, what bad luck that I had to share it.
Oh my gosh, that is the epitome of your mindset, altering an amazing thing that's happened to you.
Yeah. Now, there's some other terms I want to explore, which I think are really interesting, and that's the maximizer and satisfier. What are those things, and what's the difference between them?
Well, again, that's me quoting somebody else's work, but a maximizer, I'm very much a maximizer. So, and that sounds like a good thing, because when I do things, I do them to the absolute utmost of my ability. You know, I don't just become a runner, I go running every day. You know, I have to have all the running kit, all the gear. If I'm going to start a new hobby, I'm just going to go 100% in. But in many ways, it holds me back, because, say, for instance, at the minute, keep thinking about decluttering my house, but I keep thinking, I need 2 days to do that. I don't need 2 days to do that. I could just do a corner today, one little corner, but I'm not that way wired. So in many ways, it enables me to procrastinate. So, and a satisficer is somebody who's very much like, that'll do. That's enough. And what we know is that satisficers are very often times more content, because they're like, this is enough for me. My house is enough for me. My relationship is enough for me. My job. They're not constantly looking for an upgrade and how to make things better. So that was really interesting to me, to find out what my default setting is and be more aware of it.
Yeah, when you think about it that way, yeah, a lot of people would classify themselves as maximizers because of that possibly innate sense of always wanting everything to be perfect before you venture into it. But also maybe society and the way social media works, there's this sense of everything always being the best that we strive for. But I said satisfier, it's satisfizer. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, that kind of being satisfied with your lot. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there's another term which I think is really interesting, and that's a hedonic treadmill. And how do we get off? What is the hedonic treadmill, and how do we get off it?
Okay, so the hedonic treadmill is where we are constantly seeking an upgrade. So it's what we've just touched upon. So I'll give you an example. Whenever I bought my first flat, aged 40, I thought that was going to completely satisfy me. All I wanted was a 1-bed flat with a garden so I could get a dog. And then a couple of years later, got pregnant, had met someone. Then all I wanted was a 2-bedroom house with a garden so I could, let my dog out. And now I'm thinking, do you know what? All I want to be happy is a 3-bed, semi-detached house with a bigger garden, a south-facing garden. And so it's this impulse. And a lot of it is socially driven, and driven by the fact that we are constantly being pressured to buy more stuff. Let's not forget that. But also it is just built into our psychology. It's something which enabled us to survive, always looking for a better cave, always looking for a better stick to hunt buffalo with. I don't know. It really, really means that we were more likely to oh, sorry, I've lost my thread now. Can we edit this bit out?
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry, I've got horrible cold. All right, let me.
Oh, it didn't come across at all. No, I think you got to that point. It made a lot of sense. It's like, always wanting to expand, get the better cave. And what is it that drives that sense that we have to be constantly improving ourselves?
Yeah, so the treadmill part of the metaphor is you never stop moving. You're always walking towards something else. You never turn the treadmill off. You're always in motion. And I think many of us can relate to that, whether it's our career or, parenting. We always want to be a better parent, with health. I always want to lift stronger weights, it's just something that we do. But becoming aware of it and remembering to pause and go, hang on, I did really well buying this house, or being able to lift a 12-kilo weight. Maybe I can just pause and really allow myself to absorb that achievement and sit on this plateau and enjoy the view for a while before I get on the treadmill again and try and do something more.
Yeah. It sounds like these three concepts work so well together to kind of bring you back down to a place where you can really absorb all the things in your life that are great and that you should be living for now, rather than thinking, okay, what's the next thing and how do I find that, intangible happiness when maybe it's already all there. It sounds fascinating, and a really great reason to read your book. That brings us to the end of our questions, but I'm really interested in knowing, someone who used to have alcohol as a potential guilty pleasure and no longer does. Do you have any guilty pleasures now that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, so many. So that's what inspired my most recent book, Little Addictions, because I have many things that I use a little bit too much, whether it's TV, ice cream, nicotine. Actually, I recently quit nicotine. A lot of people vape, obviously, but I became addicted to nicotine lozenges.
Okay.
I quit. Yeah, I quit that altogether. Quit smoking like 12 years ago and became addicted to the lozenges instead. Thought that wasn't that bad. But yeah, nicotine isn't great for you, I discovered when I researched the book. But yeah, sugar. I love sugar. But what I've discovered is ways to kind of moderate down and control my use of those. So say, for instance, with TV, I've done something called time box it, where now it's time boxed within 9 to 10 p.m. a night. And with ice cream, I've changed my identity around it. I've become the kind of person who doesn't eat ice cream every night, because Thalie, genuinely, I was eating ice cream every night.
Oh, wow. I get it, because I didn't like ice cream before my pregnancies. And then after my second, well, during my second pregnancy, I developed this ice cream. I don't know. I just became obsessed with ice cream, and it never left me after that. It never left me after that. And I honestly didn't eat ice cream before, and it's not a struggle anymore, but for years and years, you give me an ice cream and I'd always want the big one, the big bucket with like, so yeah, I totally get you on that one.
It's a struggle. The struggle is real. But I wonder it was the same for me. It was when I was pregnant. That's when my ice cream habit started.
Interesting.
So I wonder.
Yeah, I couldn't get enough of it. I couldn't get enough of most things when I was pregnant, so I had to unlearn a lot of it. So please let us know as well about any books or podcasts or films that have inspired you, not just in the sober way, but in other ways as well that you'd like to share with us.
Well, I really want to tell everyone about my favorite podcast. So it's called The One You Feed, and it's based on the proverb that all of us have a good wolf and a bad wolf inside of ourselves, and the one that wins is the one that you feed. And so coming away from this like good and bad, I don't really love those terms. But it's more about what you feed, like we were just talking about with the gratitude. If you feed the positive aspects of your perspective, then you will begin to see more positives. And when it comes to behavioural change, it is the absolute gold standard. He gets really, really good guests. So I'd recommend that to everyone, The One You Feed. Yeah.
Brilliant. And we're particularly interested in behaviour change because, so much can happen with regards to improving lifestyle, reducing risk, and basically just taking control of your health when you're able to do behaviour change. But it's those blockers. So anything that influences that positively is brilliant. Where can people find out more about all your work and get a hold of your books as well?
So my books are sold at any bookshop outlet. Every single one. But in terms of, I don't do Facebook, but I do Instagram at Unexpected Joy Of. So that's the best way for people to reach me. And when people DM me, I always try to respond at least once.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, I love connecting with readers.
Thank you so much for your time, Catherine. It's been fascinating and so much great stuff here for us to share with our supporters. And I'm looking forward to getting through your other books as well.
Thank you.
Really love talking to you. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Be Well podcast, brought to you by Breast Cancer UK, a prevention charity supporting people to build healthy, lifelong habits and reduce their risk of developing breast cancer. You can start your personal prevention journey right now by taking our prevention quiz. Just click on the link in the show notes.